thank you so much for joining us this morning. We are here today to do a press conference with some really amazing people. So I'm going to introduce myself and the people that are here. But before we do that, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. I'd like to recognise that we acknowledge that the Wolseley riding is Treaty 1 land, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, OG Cree, Dakota people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We recognise that our collective experience as Manitobans is bound by treaty now and for the future, and that reconciliation begins by knowing our history, correcting mistakes, and moving forward in partnership. My name is Hannah Bell. I'm the member of the Legislative Assembly for Prince Edward Island and a member of the official opposition, having been elected twice. I'm now the House Leader in a minority government and a proud member of the Green Party. To my left is Andrea Shalay, who is the Deputy Leader of the Green Party of Manitoba and the candidate for Union Station. Next to her is Mike Schreiner, the MPP for Guelph, Ontario, the leader of the Ontario Green Party and the only elected Green in the Ontario Legislature. And last but not least is Dave Nickars, who is the candidate for Wolseley right here with the Green Party of Manitoba. Today we're going to be providing you with our policy and positions on proportional representation and how critical that is for democracy in our country and for right here in Manitoba. So with no further words from me, I'm going to hand you over to begin with Andrea Shalay. Thank you.
We are at a time of democratic crisis. So many Manitobans don't vote because they feel like their vote doesn't matter. That is a sign of an unhealthy democracy. Our current system allows a minority of people to have a majority government, and that leads to unchecked power and decision-making, unbalanced debates, and no listening to other perspectives, and often to the very people being affected by these decisions. Furthermore, this allows parties to deepen partisan divides and to prioritize the party good ahead of the good of the people. We believe, as the Green Party of Manitoba, that Manitobans deserve an electoral system that ensures that they are heard and represented, and that ensures that the good of the people goes ahead of the good of the party. What this could look like, I'm going to allow Mike Schreiner to speak about.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, it's just a real honor to be here today and supporting the Manitoba Greens and the opportunity to support Dave's campaign and support Greens across the province and to talk about an issue that's near and dear to my heart. One of the reasons I got involved in the Green Party was not only to address the impending climate crisis, but also the democratic deficit that exists in this country. And there is no better example of that right now than in Ontario. And so many of the things that you see that proportional representation and a more democratic voting system can deliver, the kinds of benefits would be an antidote to what you're seeing in Ontario right now. The rise in toxic partisanship. I haven't seen a legislature as toxic as the Ontario legislature has been over the past year, and unfortunately I've had a front row seat to witnessing that. Also, just the policy lurches you see. What we've seen in Ontario over the last year is a government that's not interested in building Ontario up, but a government that's interested in prioritizing tearing down everything that the previous government had done over the last 15 years. And one of the things I love about being a Green is we're not left or right. We're just about moving forward and doing what's right for people. And so I want to speak specifically to fiscal conservatives right now because I think it's incredibly fiscally irresponsible for a government that receives 40% of the vote, has 100% of the power to spend its first year in office dismantling what the previous government has done. And so if you look at where around the world governments with proportional representation, you don't have those policy lurches because you actually have to get along with each other. And so those types of governments and those countries with those kinds of electoral systems tend to be more fiscally responsible, fiscally balanced, while still having the resources to invest in the public services that we need and want. And finally, I just want to close by saying in Ontario, We have a provincial government that is spending millions and millions of dollars to sabotage climate solutions instead of fighting the climate crisis we face. And I every day remind the people of Ontario that 60% of Ontarians voted for a government that wants to act on climate. And 40% voted for a party that doesn't want to act on climate. And yet that 40% has 100% of the power and is setting our province back, setting our country back. And so one of the things that I'm proud to stand here with the Green Party of Manitoba to talk about bringing in a new electoral system to improve our democracy, to ensure that every vote counts, and to ensure that our legislatures and our federal parliament represents the democratic will of the people. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks Mike, Hannah, and Andrea. I'm here to, I want to share a story about my time at the door. I've spent almost 5 months canvassing in Wolseley, and I'm talking to people every day about number one issue that seems to be coming up is healthcare. They're either suffering under the healthcare changes, they either work in the healthcare industry or they know someone who does, and because of the cuts and changes by the PC government, we are seeing a huge policy shift. Now we talked about policy lurch before, and this is what happens in Manitoba. We elect a majority government for 10, 15, 20 years, and then we go to another majority government. Proportional representation under the system we're proposing would reduce the number of majority governments. And not only that, it would have parties learning to work together better on policy, not just on the votes in the legislature, but as Hannibal could talk about for PEI, even on the committee level. So we're not just stacking the committees with the majority of the government, we can work much better together. This is why elected Greens, if we are elected, will make our voting system more fair, proportional, while making our elected officials more accountable. So I just want to go over quickly a few of our policies. Greens want to do politics differently. We will work to build confidence in our government by putting the needs of Manitobans first and insisting that government be held accountable by strong, independent oversight. So the big piece is the proportional representation system. We want to implement a mixed member proportional representation system. We would have the same number of members of the legislature, but we'd have 50 ridings and you'd vote for them just like you do now. And so when you get the result at the end of a first past the post voting, you have a difference in the number of seats, the percentage of seats, and there's a difference in the percentage of people who voted for them. So the 7 extra seats would be a top up for the parties that didn't get enough seats to truly represent the number. So it would be a fairer system, it would eliminate strategic voting, and people could vote for who they want, not the least worst candidate. We would also allow for more free votes in the legislature so that MLAs can represent their constituencies better. We would introduce greater amounts of consultation between elections. We would require the Premier to hold at least 2 town hall meetings per year about their policy and have actual, real, meaningful public consultation. We want to increase the participation of youth in the democratic process. That's why we want to lower the voting age to 16 years old. This is their future that we're playing with here. And we need younger people not only to be involved in the decision making, but if you vote when you're younger, it's likely that you'll vote more in the future. We want to respect fixed terms and election dates. I think that goes without saying. I loved canvassing all summer and watching the plants come up in May and June and having to deal with the worms and everything, but I would rather be canvassing in October 2020 when our election is supposed to be. That's an important part of the electoral system. We need fixed term election dates. And about the rapport in the legislature. Last year I was in the legislature watching a session go, and they had brought kids into the gallery. And what happened was, I was really glad that they left early, because what happened was everybody was talking over each other. They were heckling the speaker, the person speaking, talking about selfies and all sorts of things. It was really disrespectful. And we really need to change that in the legislature. Hannah Bell could expand on this, because the changes in PEI came from the Greens, and more work gets done when there's less heckling. And really, you need to collaborate with your colleagues. You don't need to shout them down. So I think that's something, if Greens are elected in Manitoba, we want to bring that to the legislatures, have a better sense of respect for each other, and represent our riding, of course, as strongly as we can, but without being disrespectful. So yeah, that's essentially it. Elected Greens would enact these changes, and of course we encourage all Manitobans to encourage even other parties. This is also a nonpartisan issue. Of course we want you to elect the legislature full of Greens and form government, but after the election, contact your MLA and ask them to support these changes. Thank you all for listening, and we're ready for questions now.
So the Trudeau government, obviously it was one of their big campaign promises going into the 2016 election.
Yes, it was.
Which has since been rolled back. The reason that, Trudeau pulled these changes to the electoral system was because he said that, Canadians are mixed on this. And, we've seen referendums in BC as well as PEI turnout results that are not favorable to proportional representation. So what are your thoughts on that?
Trudeau won a federal election on a flagship promise of implementing proportional representation. There was no ambiguity about his remarks. In fact, it keeps ringing in my head. 2015 is the last election with first past the post, and he won a government on that. So that's why we would implement these changes directly without referendum in Manitoba. He had a mandate to do that, and I guess I have to take him at his word, but it certainly was a promise that was broken.
And I can add, with the referendum in PEI, which was held at the same time as the provincial election to ensure turnout, there was a supermajority requirement for that referendum vote to be approved. So not only a majority of votes in favour, but also a higher majority of actual districts had to be in favour. So it was, 49% on the vote, but the requirement for the districts was made it practically impossible for that to have ever gotten forward. At the same time, we're electing representatives who are elected with 40% of the vote, and that's absolutely fine. So we need to be a bit more realistic when we ask those kind of decisions to be made by the public. Are we setting the same criteria? Why do we set a higher standard of criteria for that referendum question than we do in terms of actually electing the people who then make the decisions? And I think at this point we're probably past the point of referendum, and that's our opinion from the provincial caucus in PEI. But I think we've talked about that, here as well. Is that if you keep asking, you're going to wear people out with the asking. At some point, we need to think about maybe what they've done in New Zealand, which is put it in place and see how it goes.
Would you guys do a referendum prior to implementing this, or is that something that you like?
The Green Party of Manitoba would not. We would implement it. We'd work to implementing it, because part of it is a fairer voting system would benefit more people right away. You would be able to vote for who you want to, and a fairer system is its own reward, so to speak.
Do you guys mind sort of just, saying again very simply exactly how the system would look under the Greens?
So, do you want to take it? Okay, so mixed member proportional representation is what we're going to be doing in Manitoba. We have the same number of seats we have now, 57. We would have 50 ridings, and you would vote for those 50 representatives just like you do now, just under first past the post. And so when you get the election results, you always get a difference between the number of seats represented in the legislature and representation in terms of population. So there's always that difference. So those 7 extra seats would be a top-up, and they would be given to parties to help bring that seat count closer to the actual proportion of the vote that the public put in. So no longer would you have to, hold your nose and vote for a party you don't like to get out a worse party. You could vote for who you want, and with a threshold of 5% of the vote, so we wouldn't have, hundreds of parties in the legislature, or hundreds of potential parties, then those seats would be allocated according to what would be more fair in terms of popular representation.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Are there any other questions from all the men behind the cameras? We can see you. Very quiet.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you all
great.
for coming.
Thanks so much for coming.
And
Absolutely.
of course, we'll be around for individual questions if you like.
Mhm.
And I'd like to thank my guests from out of town as well. That was very kind of them to come here and participate in our electoral process.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
thanks. Thank you all.
Thank you.